This is the WGBH Forum Network.
Let me add my welcome to all of you for the Cambridge Forum tonight. Tim just read the title of the book, The Exception to the Rulers. There is also a provocative subtitle, Exposing Oily Politicians, War Profiteers, and the Media That Love Them. The book, by Amy Goodman and her brother David, explores the role of corporate-owned media and the risks that they pose to a democratic society. Our guests tonight are the book's authors and MIT professor Noam Chomsky. Speaking first will be David Goodman. He's an award-winning independent journalist. He's the author of 5 books, including the critically acclaimed Fault Lines, Journeys into the New South Africa. Mr. Goodman is a contributing writer for Mother Jones. His articles have appeared in The Nation, The Washington Post, The Washington Quarterly, The Christian Science Monitor, The Boston Globe, Outside, and The Village Voice, among others. Welcome to the Cambridge Forum, David Goodman.
Thanks, and it's great to be here. I want to dispel any rumors that Amy and I wrote this book just so we could be sure to get a seat at a Noam Chomsky talk in Cambridge. But it sure helps, and it is really a particular honor to be up here with somebody who both of us have really admired and looked up to. And when I went to school here at that place across the street 20 years ago, I like to think I didn't miss too many of your talks wedged into whatever room that was overflowing and over at MIT or around here. This is a stop we've really looked forward to, but it's also part of a 70-city tour we are doing for The Exception to the Rulers. And the tour is a celebration of several things. One is of independent media all around the country, and we've going from California to Maine. Often the events are fundraisers for local community radio and TV stations. It's a celebration of independent bookstores like the Harvard Bookstore, endangered species in this age of the corporatization of everything, especially the bookstores, and also a celebration of the work that so many of you do in your own communities just to make a difference. I'm going to read a little bit from The Exception of the Rulers to give you an idea of what we do here. I like to think that a lot of what we're doing here are telling you the stories you should have read or heard in the corporate media, but didn't. And it really should not be necessary for a couple of journalists to write a book called The Exception to the Rulers. That ought to be the motto of all media. But unfortunately, as we saw, particularly in the war on Iraq, the media served as a megaphone to the rulers. One of the things we look at was the whole embedding process, embedding reporters with the military, which really, I think, represented a low point in the history of journalism in this country. Interestingly, we just came from talking to journalists over at the Neiman Foundation, and privately, off the record, in intimate conversation, so many of those journalists agreed with us. Unfortunately, you're not seeing this where it counts, which is in the moment. So we tell you in our chapter on this, it's called In Bed with the Military, and we give you a little of the pillow talk that the in-beds were sharing with each other, but not with you. We have, for example, from Gordon Dillow, columnist for the Orange County Register, who was embedded with the Marines. He said, quote, "The Baghdad fight was a close enough thing that at one point a Marine gave me a hand grenade to throw if the enemy started to overwhelm us. It had been more than 30 years since I'd held a grenade. I'd been an Army sergeant in Vietnam, and I knew that my having it violated written and unwritten rules. Still, it felt comforting in my hand." From Rick Leventhal, embedded correspondent with the Marines, he worked for Fox News. Quote, "It was difficult. We were dressing like them, and we were eating and sleeping with them. We became a part of them." And lastly, from Chantal Escoto, reporting for the Leaf Chronicle, embedded with the Marines, quote, "I was a non-combatant, but I told them I'd be willing to pick up a gun if I had to. They're pretty easy to use. It's point and shoot." Well, one of the nice things you get to do when you write a book is you don't have to turn to the know-nothing pundits for an analysis of what's going on in the news. You can turn to people who you really think got it right the first time around. We chose Groucho Marx. In our chapter called Sanitize, which pretty much sums up what we thought of the imagery of war that was coming back, we let Groucho kick it off with his quote, "I must say I find television very educational. The minute somebody turns it on, I go to the library and read a book." Another part of the hidden news is the war at home, and that war has been waged against people in the immigrant communities and against political dissidents and dissent in general. Some of the people that are really on the sharp end of the stick have been people from immigrant communities all around this country. In December 2002, Amy attended the meeting of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Now, that was a particularly meaningful time because more than 1,500 Muslims were there. It was December 21st, the day after the second special registration of immigrants in the United States. The special registration was originally going to cover just 5 countries, but each month the INS added another set to the list. Between November 2002 and April 2003, all male non-citizens over the age of 16 from 25 different countries, almost all of them predominantly Muslim or Arab nations, were required to register and be interviewed by the INS. And incidentally, the upshot of all that was as follows. Of the 83,519 males from 25 countries who voluntarily registered, nearly 1 in 6 were placed in deportation proceedings. The government said that 2,870 people were detained during this time, and of these, 11 individuals had, quote, suspected terrorist ties, although a Homeland Security Department spokesman had no information on their cases. We spoke to, one of the people who spoke at that meeting was an Iranian-American attorney who described her exasperation and horror at the process as people were rounded up. So many people were arrested at the special registration in LA, they ran out of plastic handcuffs. She exclaimed at this conference, "What happened to the Sixth Amendment? What happened to due process?" And she continued, "It's not a Muslim thing, it's not an Iranian thing, it's not an Arab thing, it's a human thing. Today it's men over the age of 16 from these countries. Tomorrow it'll be women over the age of 16. Then we'll go to permanent residence. It's a wake-up call." Well, as we learned as we researched the book, the wake-up call has already been delivered on our doorstep, and that is to people who have dared to dissent during this time of war. There were so many little, mundane, day-to-day stories, we just included what we called a crackdown sampler. Here's a few. Protester with sign charged with threatening the president's safety. Brett Bursey, the executive director of the South Carolina Progressive Network, was arrested for holding a sign that read, quote, "No war for oil," outside a venue where President Bush was giving a speech in October 2002. He was charged with threatening the president's safety. Bursey, who was nowhere near the president, said the police told him he should move to a free speech zone. He refused. He refused, saying, quote, "I thought the whole country was a free speech zone." Busted for a peace T-shirt. On March 3rd, 2003, a father and son went shopping at a mall outside of Albany, New York. The two had bought T-shirts at the mall and promptly put them on. Stephen Downs' shirt read, quote, "Give peace a chance," and "Peace on Earth." His son Roger had a shirt that read, "Let inspections work," and "No war with Iraq." A mall security guard requested that both men take off the T-shirts. When Stephen Downs refused, the mall called the police. Soon, Downs, a retired attorney with the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, was in handcuffs, arrested on trespassing charges. 2 days later, 150 supporters wearing peace T-shirts descended on the mall, forcing them to drop the charges. Anti-war actor banned. Following actor Danny Glover's public criticism in November 2001 of the use of military tribunals, the Modesto, California City Council attempted to disinvite Glover as the featured speaker for the official celebration of Martin Luther King Day 2002. Glover wondered if King, who called the United States, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, would have been invited to his own birthday party if he were still alive. A week ago, we were being interviewed by a reporter who responded to things he read in the book by saying, isn't this just a little bit much, a little extreme? You make it out to be like we're like some repressive country out there that's... Again, a nice thing when you write a book is you don't have to answer those questions. You can turn to people who are much smarter and more experienced in these matters. So we chose Chilean author Ariel Dorfman, who narrowly escaped death on September 11, 1973, when a last-minute change kept him from his work at the presidential palace in Santiago, where he was cultural advisor to Chilean President Salvador Allende. Allende died that day when Chilean troops stormed the palace in a U.S.-backed coup, and Dorfman was forced into exile. On the second anniversary of the September 11th attacks in the U.S., he wrote an essay, Lessons of a Catastrophe. Here's a little excerpt. It can't happen here. 30 years ago, that is what we chanted. That is what we sang on the streets of Santiago de Chile. It can't happen here. There can never be a dictatorship in this country, we proclaimed to the winds of history that were about to furiously descend on us. Our democracy is too solid, our armed forces too committed to popular sovereignty, our people too much in love with freedom. But it did happen. The bombing by the Air Force of the presidential palace on September 11, 1973, started a dictatorship that was to last 17 years and that today, even after we have recovered democracy, continues to haunt and corrode my country. In the coming years, could something similar befall those nations with apparently stable democracies? Could the erosion of freedom that so many in Chile accepted as necessary find a perverse recurrence in the United States, or India, or Brazil, in France, or Spain, or Britain? What has transpired thus far in the 2 years since the disastrous attacks on New York and Washington is far from encouraging. We also thought, we also shouted, we also assured the planet, it cannot happen here. We also thought, on those not-so-remote streets of Santiago, that we could shut our eyes to the terrors that were awaiting us tomorrow. Before turning this over to Amy and Noam, I thought it's only fitting that I reveal there is, in fact, a connection between the people on this stage. And we have my mother, Dory Goodman, brother Dan Goodman, are here tonight. It's a special treat for us. And we've been having a debate raging all day as to the actual history with Noam Chomsky, but I can give you the beginnings of it, and Noam may have to defend himself later, but our late father, George Goodman, and Noam were camp counselors together at a Hebrew-speaking camp in Pennsylvania, I think it was, and I guess the only rule was you couldn't speak English all day, which may explain something about the career that Noam chose for the rest of his life about studying this. But the piece that we're going to need clarification on is, now Amy insists this is true, my mother denies it. Amy says that at one point you got into something with my father and you bit him. So... any pretense of being, peaceful, nonviolent defenders here, we're going to have to settle this score once and for all tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David Goodman. You're listening to the Cambridge Forum, discussing the role of the media in democracy. Our next speaker is Amy Goodman. In The Exception to the Rulers, she writes that the responsibility of a journalist